Ernie. It is so nice to have you back on the corner. Jimmy Hall and Wet Willie are one of our most requested artists, and I was
Really?
so blessed to see Jimmy Hall perform as a solo artist in North Carolina, and he was absolutely dynamic.
Yeah.
And that album cover behind you looks just the same for Wet Willie.
Yeah. It's funny because we met them. We talk about this a lot about how, music played a big part in everything that I did, whether it was the main thing or just the thing that got me my foot in the door. And in early in the career, it was a negative in corporate America. Later in the career, it became a big plus, and it's really funny how that happened. And Wet Willie, it was a very interesting way that we met them. When I came to LA from New York to open up the satellite office for the guy that we work for, my partner, then his vice president, and I, we rented a building space because we were going to set up an office. I was going to set up the art department. He was going to set up the business part of it, and we were promised all this work from A&M Records and stuff, and which never materialized. And we rented a space on Sunset and Wilcox, right across from, that Dome Theater that's there on Sunset, famous Dome Theater. We were kitty corner to that. And Amoeba Records was right across the street, but not at that time. This is 1971. So we rented this space. We were on the third floor, and right down the hall and around the corner was Capricorn Records and Phil Walden. And, Dickie Betts and Lee Dorman and all these people that Rhino, the people that we had met there. And we used to go down, during lunch or maybe after work. We would go down the hall, or they would come up and spend time with us. And Phil Walden had some just amazing stories about, he used to manage Otis Redding. And when he would tour during, when he was managing him, they would tour the South. And man, it was really tough. Some of the stories he had, because blacks weren't really, they could perform in a club, but they couldn't stay there. It was like they had their own parts of town, and I can remember going to Kentucky when I was in the fifth grade, and there was a white section of town and a black section of town, and thank God all that's gone. But a lot, like everything else, that changes, and that changed for the good. But, it was very weird. Some of the stories that he had, while he was, and things that they would get, they would get screwed out of the money, and they would try and cheat him. And Phil was a really character, man. I mean, that guy was great. And, what happened was, one of the times that we went there, there was his producer friend, Johnny Sandlin, was the producing, some stuff for Phil. And he was handling this group called Wet Willie. And Wet Willie was, the finger in the mouth and you stick it in the ear. That's how they described it to me, and then, after I met Johnny, and Johnny was friends with Bones Howe. Are you familiar with Bones?
Yes, yes, just
Okay,
an
Bones
amazing producer.
okay. Yeah, Bones and Pacific Pioneer were like brothers. I mean, Bones was just incredible, and like Shep Gordon, and what's his name? Sometimes I get these mind farts because I'm trying to think of too many things. Alice Cooper's manager or producer, Bob Ezrin, and Bones Howe and Johnny were all friends. And so when I met Johnny for the first time at Capricorn Records, we were talking, and Bones came up, and Joe Wizard, which is another producer friend who produced Earth, Wind, and Fire. And Joe was a pretty incredible guy as well. And anyway, Johnny really liked the work that I had done up to that point, with the Jesus Christ Superstar, the Rolling Stones, and then, the Alice Cooper thing. We were working with Alice on, we had just sold the Schools Out album to him and Shep, and we had sold the Big Bamboo album out to Lou Adler and Cheech and Chong. And so we had a lot in common. And so Johnny said, well, he talked to Phil and said, hey, these guys should really be doing Wet Willie's cover, and they weren't available for a photograph. They wanted an illustration. Okay. So what we did was we did this crazy illustration that you see over here behind me. I always get mixed up that way. And I put myself in the middle. I'm not on the corner. I'm in the middle, but because I wanted you to see these two as big as you could see them. Carl Ramsey was an airbrush illustrator that was a staff illustrator at Pacific Pioneer. He did that Wet Willie glob. And what I did was I took and got all these newspaper clippings, articles, and put it together like a collage of what a paper would be in one of these seedy magazines with all the girly things. And if you look real close, and I'll send you these images so you can post them bigger, you'll see all these like really sort of risque images and stuff. And they never really said anything. We thought for sure we'd run into problems when we turned it into the record company, but we didn't. But if you look real close, you'll see a lot of really weird stuff. And they loved it. We had actually given it to Phil, and Phil was on his way back south to I think out to Atlanta Atlanta, yeah, and was going to meet with them, and he was going back for oh God, he was going back there to also meet with the Allman Brothers and Dickie Betts, like I said, and Greg Allman. And I would have loved to have done something for the Allman Brothers, but I did do work for Dickie Betts, who was really great. He was very involved with the American Indian thing that was going on there, and so we did a bunch of stuff for him there. But these guys from Wet Willie loved the cover, and so they said, well, we're going to get ready to go on tour. We need a tour poster. So Joe Patagno, who you may know the name, he did pretty much all of the Lemmy, Motorhead and Lemmy. He did a lot of those album covers. He was known as the Drew Struzan of heavy metal, and he had worked with us for about a year and a half, and so he was there as a staff illustrator, and we had him do this tour poster for Wet Willie, which is really great. It's like a 36 Ford, and it's this beautiful cartoon that he did. And they used that as their tour poster for that upcoming tour, and Drippin Wet, and so it was really an interesting group to work with, and we never really got a chance to meet anybody from the group really, other than Jimmy, I mean not Jimmy, but I'm sorry, Johnny, the producer, and Phil Walden, and working with Phil. We worked on stuff with him on a couple albums, especially Captain Beyond, and it was really a strange label for Captain Beyond to sign to, because they were a heavy metal, and Capricorn Records was a real laid back Southern kind of rock and roll thing, but it worked out really well. I mean, Phil Walden was great, Lee Dorman, bass player in Iron Butterfly, and then the head guy in the reformation of Iron Butterfly to Captain Beyond. And that was a whole nother thing. But working with Capricorn was really interesting, because it wasn't long after we started working with them on Captain Beyond that we actually left Craig Braun and started Pacific Pioneer. And all those groups came with us, including Phil Walden. They had been talking with us at Craig Braun, but they knew that they really liked Tony. They really loved the creative we were doing. So they followed us, along with Alice Cooper and, a whole bunch of the other, including Cheech and Chong. But that was a whole nother story that we'll talk about sometime. But that All-American Drug Dealing game package that never saw daylight was really a great package. And in fact, Robbie Chong, Chong's daughter, had reached out to me because they were working on a documentary and wanted all the sketches and stuff that we had done for that album, because there was a lot of talk about it, but nobody really had anything but me. And I had all the photography. There was like $25,000 worth of photography with, Faye Dunaway, Jack Nicholson, Lloyd Axton, all these acts that were on Ode Records and A&M Records, and friends, movie stars and friends of, Lou Adler. So, that was quite a thing that I think we talked about, didn't we, on one of the shows? Yeah. And so it's so weird how I look back at this stuff, and it was all connected. It was all knowing this person and that person. And then sometimes something would come out of left field. It was, it was really strange. And I think I had said before, one of the interesting things about Pacific Pioneer was at a certain point, we'd just come in, turn on the lights, turn on the music, and the phone would start ringing, and it would be all these opportunities coming along. And that was just really great to be in the right spot at the right time. But, the album Drippin Wet was a really good album, and there was a lot of really, they did one of my favorite cuts from the album. And I know, I don't want to go into the songs yet, but, they did a cover of That's All Right, which was an Elvis Presley song. And they nailed it. I mean, they slammed it. And so that'll obviously be one of the songs that I picked from that album. But I had really never been into their music before they reached out to us. I mean, and before Phil and Johnny reached out to us. But yeah, Jimmy, was an incredible singer, and played an amazing harmonica, on the album. And, I mean, and he was also a writer, of some of the songs. These are all things that I learned, from Phil and from Johnny, just talking with them. It was a funny thing because we never really got a chance to interact with them.
Oh, that's a shame.
But yet we nailed it. We nailed it on the album cover, and we nailed it on the tour poster, and then never did anything for him again. It was really weird. It was one of those one-time kind of things that, just come along. We had a bunch of those, and then there were ones that were loyal, like Black Oak and Alice, and some of the other ones, Jefferson Airplane. We were working with Grunt Records for quite a few albums, and then things just changed. People go their own directions, and it's funny how that works because I fell in love with everything we did, and it was hard for me to get around the fact that they wouldn't come back. They didn't come back, and whether it was political, money was never the issue, because we would get between $1,500 and maybe $3,000 for an album cover, and that's all in. That's concept design, mechanicals, photography if needed, illustration if needed. It was like that. That's what the going price was, and one of the reasons why so I knew that money was never the thing, and we hit it off really good with a lot of them. We had issues with some of them, like we talked about JoJo Gunn.
Yeah,
That was, yeah, that was something that I still regret to this day. But everything happens for a reason, And one of the important things that I learned from my first partner Tony was that no matter what, nothing ever lasts forever.
That's true.
You may love this person and they love you, but somewhere down the line, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. It just, life has a way of taking you and putting you over here, and it all changes, drops you into this thing. And, and that happened a lot for me because the music was one thing and corporate America was another. And sometimes they would overlap. Like when we got Alltech Lansing, that was the first real major account that we were the agency for. And we beat out 3 or 4 major agencies to get that account. But what the other guys didn't know was that the guy who turned us on to Alltech Lansing was also one of the group of roadies that was for the Rolling Stones. And he was one of the first roadies. And we became friends because he was working for a kickbox company for guitar players. And they were they wanted an endorsement ad from Black Oak, Arkansas. And Black Oak said, Butch Stone said, okay, well, we'll definitely do it, but you're going to have to deal with our agency, Pacific Pioneer. And this guy really didn't know Pacific Pioneer, but Rich Mandela, when he came over to the office, it was like, oh my God, you're the guy that did the Rolling Stones song. I've heard all about you. And you were one of their first roadies. And now you're at Alltech Lansing, as his job was the liaison between the company and the musician. We did a bunch of stuff for the Rolling Stones. We did a bunch of stuff for Rod Stewart, who was also doing endorsement ads. They were all doing endorsement ads for Alltech, the company. And what had happened was James B. Lansing was an engineer that worked at Alltech and left Alltech and started JBL. then he goes back to Alltech, and they form a partnership doing a series of bookshelf speakers because music was really in the limelight. This is the 70s now, and everybody was into music. And they did some research and found out that, they could make a bookshelf speaker really economically and sell it to students, college students and high school kids. And so they could listen to their music behind a great speaker. And we became the agency for that piece of business. And meeting James, was a really amazing. I was able to meet him, and also Gene Serwinski, who owns Sherwin Vega, because like the case company, the cases that musicians put their instruments in, like Anvil cases. Mm-hmm. We did all Anvil cases branding from the early 70s, when the guy that owned it was called Acme Crate. And he had two sons that were guitar players, and they went to him and wanted him to build a case for their guitars. So he built the first Anvil cases with the ball corners and everything. He built those for his kids. His kids were touring, and other musicians would go, "Where did you get that? I want to." And that's how Alltech started. And we became the agency because of the music thing.
That is a great story. I never knew that.
Yeah, Wayne Thompson owned the company, and it was his kids that needed the cases built, and then he needed to change course because he was building wooden crates. That's what he did. It was like the Roadrunner, man. Acme crates, and they built wooden crates. And these cases that he had built for his sons took off like crazy. So now he needed an agency, and what better agency to appeal to musicians than Pacific Pioneer, because we were, and our name was around. We would get mentioned. When people would be backstage or people would be talking, other musicians to each other, because it was a very tight community. They all kind of really knew each other. And I guess it's still like that today, especially through the roadies all interact with each other when they're on tour and they're making the same, doing the same gig. And musician Burton Cummings he has some great stories about partying with the roadies all night and not making the concert at Carnegie Hall. They had that we need to talk about that at some point, because they had moved all this recording equipment, their trucks outside of Carnegie Hall, right? And they flew all the relatives in to New York to have this big Guess Who concert. And Burton stayed up all night partying with the roadies and called in the next day and said, "I'm not going to be able to make the concert." And so they had to postpone it. And it was supposed to be a 2-night thing. They postponed it the second night too. And then years later, he did a video where he apologized to everybody for doing that. So there was a lot of interaction, in a small community. So our name got around. If it wasn't from the act or the manager, it was from the roadies. Because we met a lot of the roadies. They would come over to the office when they're in town, their groups are recording, or they're practicing, they're rehearsing to get ready to go out. And they would rehearse at Studio Instrument Rentals. And I had always heard of them. And we ended up getting them as an account. And we did their corporate identity, we did everything. And I got to tell you, it was probably the number one worst client I ever had in my whole life. There were 3 partners. And one of them was, and I think I mentioned this to you, one of them was Dean Torrance's brother from Jan and Dean. And he started SIR with a couple other guys. And he was cool. And he owned A&J cases, shipping cases. And I did work for them too. And that's how I met him. And, you should do some stuff for Studio Instrument Rentals. So we did all that. But and the other partner in New York was really cool. But they had this other partner that was he was crazy. It was crazy. And he would cause all these problems. And so finally I just said, I remember talking to him and saying, I just can't work with you guys anymore. I just can't do it. I can't. It's not about the money. It's not about anything, but just your partner's an idiot, and I don't want to deal with him. It's too much brain damage, and I'm sorry we got off the Wet Willie thing, but all these stories are connected, and there's so many that I haven't even told you. Bones Howe, we did some great stuff with Bones. Bones was just Anytime he was around, he would stop by, and he was involved with Haji Sound, which was a recording truck with a recording studio in it that was our neighbors in the crossroads of the world, Haji Sound, and that's how I met Jim Messina, because Jim Messina was a investor in this mobile recording studio, and he would come over and found out that Pacific Ioneer was right next door from the guys at Haji Sound, and he came over. He was really, I mean, and Loggins and Messina were great. I loved them, So I mean, Pacific Ioneer was really kind of like a community, what Joe Garnett, God bless his soul, he said at one time to me, he said, Pacific Ioneer is like Mecca. You attract all these creative people that want to do what you're doing. They come to you, and it's like, for me, it was like going to Mecca. And this is an incredible artist. Joe Garnett was amazing, did a lot of really cool stuff. And, he came to work for us and worked with us for about a year, and then had a nervous breakdown with drugs and stuff. But that's a whole nother story. Joe was amazing. And we actually reconnected probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it was great. I had sent him some stuff. He sent me some stuff, and then he passed away about 2.5 years ago. And but what a body of work. You can Google him, Joe Garnett, and you can see there's a video out there on him, and just some amazing album covers, mainly album cover stuff, not really corporate. He did the Doors Full Circle illustration for us, and Cowboy, and a bunch of other Cowboy. That was another group that nobody ever heard of, came and went.
Yeah, well, I'm learning again now, Ernie. Oh my! Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
Wet Willie? When I look at this design, what comes up for me? The old monster movies, the that you would see on television. That's
Right.
what I'm thinking of, because I'm looking at the faces, and
Oh yeah.
and I
Well, again, I'll send you all these images so you can post them bigger, because they're really good. I mean, Carl did a beautiful job on the cover. I did the lettering, and then Joe Patagno, you can Google him too. I mean, he's an amazing illustrator. He worked on the illustrated Beatles book with Alan Aldrich, and he worked with us for about a year, a little bit longer, and then he decided he wanted to go to Europe and in England, and so he left, went to England, worked with him on that, and then he moved to Switzerland, I think, or Sweden, where he lives now. But he got into doing all the Motorhead, the really cool, crazy, heavy metal stuff that Motorhead did. Joe Patagno did, and like I said, he worked on a half a dozen. I think I have 13 pieces of his originals in the collection. And this tour poster is one of them. It's beautiful.
It is.
It's really a beautiful illustration. Yeah, and it was funny that you should pick up on that, because we wanted to have that kind of horror movie, science fiction kind of thing. It was either that or a wet finger with the dripping goop on it. Which was one of the sketches that we showed.
I like the horror.
Yeah.
I think
And
that
so
really
did they.
captures it.
When I showed John and Phil that we did a bunch of sketches, and this was a quick comp that we put together that you see there that they really liked, and then we had another illustration of this finger with a big goop on it, because that's what Wet Willie really was. And they all went, no, that ain't it. That ain't gonna be it. We like the other one, and we like the fact that there's all these like hidden little. Like I said, when I send you the cover, you'll see there's like these X-rated films, and it's just like all kind of woven in there very secretively. But and they loved that. They absolutely loved it. And again, feedback from the group through Phil, and it was great, because like I said, all of them followed us after we left. And I've always been blessed, Chad, because my clients, one of the things that I try to do is be friends with them. I want my clients to feel comfortable around me. And if I'm a friend and they're a friend, we have a comfort level that goes beyond client agency, and to this day, I mean, and even when there were a couple situations where I had Nestle and I was at this client, I was working for these guys, and it's another long, crazy story. But when I left, they all left with me. Cartoon Network, where we talked about,
yes.
Johnny Quest. They left, Nestle left, and followed me wherever I went. And so I from the record business, I learned that because the guy that we worked for, Tony and I, before we started Pacific Pioneer, he would use people for what he could get. And then when he couldn't get any more, they were gone. And that's not how you treat people. That's not how you befriend people and make them comfortable with you. And then they find out that you're only using them. And that was one of the major reasons why we left his company and started Pacific Pioneer. We didn't believe that people needed to be treated like that. Tony and I were in total sync. And the funny thing about that is that we didn't really like each other when we were in New York. When we were working, he was in sales and he was, on one floor and I was on the other floor and I was in the creative. And those two, that's why agencies and most design studios will not put a marketing person together with a creative. They keep them separate because they're like dogs and cats. Yeah, so what they do is they keep the marketing people here and they put the creative people here. And then in between, they put an account executive who is like Switzerland. He can do with the creative and he can do with the marketing. And he is the one that relays from one to the other because those two don't get along. Tony and I were the same way in New York. When we came to LA to open up the LA office, we were forced to like each other. We were living in the same apartment that was rented for us. And, we were failing together, and it's really funny when you're failing, even more than when you're succeeding, you tend to form alliances and trust. There was a trust there that was formed in those almost 3 months that we were out here together. And we had worked together for almost a year before we came, and we never got along really, and when we were forced to be the same two fish in the same fishbowl and things were not working out the way they were supposed to and the way it was promised, it just made us tighter. It made us, and that's when I felt comfortable enough to show Tony the comp for for Schools Out and the other comp for Big Bamboo. And because it was the work that was promised wasn't happening. He was having trouble, covering the rent because it was, and we were constantly getting pressured, well, you're supposed to do this. Yeah, well, you were supposed to have all this and it didn't materialize. And so at that point, I shared these comps that I had created with Tony, and it was like magic, Joyce. It was like magic. It was like the first time I saw Bonnie. I just knew that this is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I love her and I love Tony. Tony, it's hard to explain, but we had about a 13-year relationship that was awesome. And then the last year and a half, a lot of other things entered into the relationship that just drove us apart. And so after 14 and a half years, he went his way, I went my way. And about 5 years ago, he died of bladder cancer, the same thing that I had, but he ignored it.
Oh, that is such a shame. Oh,
yeah, so but that's how it rolls, man. I'm just glad that I found it early enough and that I'm still healthy and I'm alive and I'm here on the block.
Yeah, God has a plan for you.
I'm so comfortable. Yeah.
Well,
God,
before I let you off the block,
that's
any
right.
songs, any Wet Willie songs you want to hear?
Okay. Like I said earlier, That's All Right. They just do a slamming job on that. And then Red Hot Chicken. Hot Chicken.
I was between Red Hot Chicken and Shout Bamalama.
Shout Bamalama is good too. Maybe you want to make it four songs.
Who knows? Because we've got a lot of Wet Willie fans, and we have a lot of.
I'll tell you, I wish that I would have met them. I wish that I could have done more for them. They were a fun. Only through Phil and through Johnny, they were just as crazy as we were, and that was what was so great about working with Alice. And we've talked about that before. He said many times, I love working with Pacific Pioneer because they're crazier than we are. We were coming up with stuff that just really, Whiplash makeup and all this Budweiser, trying to get Budweiser to do an endorsement because that's what he drank, and they wouldn't even return our calls. They wouldn't return Shep's calls.
No,
now they crawl on their knees to get him to do it, but now he's quit drinking. Thank God for that.
Yes.
And Alice is really an amazing person, and he deserves everything that he's gotten. Cheryl is a wonderful wife. He's got beautiful kids. You know, he's an icon.